Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Sam and this is The Lonely Chapter. It's a show where we speak to interesting people, finding out their stories, finding out what motivates them, and also learning from their highs and their lows. Today it is just me. I've been asked by a couple of people to do a bit more of an in-depth look at my story and my journey into where I am now. Even though the podcast aims to learn from other people, I think it's important that you get to know me properly too. Thank you for listening. This one was made for your enjoyment. I want to start today's episode by just quickly reflecting back. So we're 10 episodes in already. This would be number 11. I just want to thank you if you have been listening, whether you've been a regular listener, whether you've been just this episode. Thank you anyway, and have a look back at previous episodes. Hopefully you will find some value in those. We've got some really exciting guests lined up throughout July, for the next month or two as well into August. So really excited for that. So follow along, follow the social medias if you haven't already, just to keep up to date with who is coming on and who we've got. All that I can ask is that you keep listening, keep sharing the show with people who you think will enjoy it, engaging on the social media, that really helps, sending feedback to me personally. Either you can text in the descriptions of each episode directly to me, or through social media as well. That really helps. And yeah, rate the show as well if you enjoy it. So thank you. Thank yous out the way. Let's get into it. So I want to start with a theme that sort of runs through my life from the start until now, essentially. So that's sport. It's always been an outlet for me. I remember growing up, I was into all sorts of sports. So I played cricket, tennis, football. I ran, cycled. The list goes on. And it's only got bigger, the list, as my life has gone on. I'm lucky that my parents are sporty. They've always encouraged and enabled me to partake in those sports whilst growing up. But that has been, from the start of what I can remember, always been a staple throughout my life is sports and exercise. So I'm very lucky in that regard. I was encouraged to do that early doors. Throughout my school life, I remember coming home and spending the afternoon, going into the evening when it got dark, playing football across the road, with the local guys from my road. Yeah, it was a great time. The importance of sport in my life is something that will reappear later on in this episode as we move into it. So going into me slightly as a person, I've always been a shy person. And at times, especially as I grew up a bit more, resented that in myself. I looked at myself after social situations and thought, why were you so shy there? Why didn't you just say something? Why didn't you ask that person this? Why? And it was always looking back and thinking that way. That was sort of around the time, I suppose, when I was early 20s. You start to socialize with new people, start to socialize with people outside of your friendship groups. You start drinking as well in that sort of age, or a bit earlier potentially. But yeah, it was something that at the time I almost gave myself the label of being a shy person. So when I went out into those social situations, I didn't put myself out there. I didn't speak to new people because I thought, no, you're a shy person. You don't do that. That's not you. The only way that I managed to do that was through alcohol. So I would drink in order to have the courage to go and speak to people. And I think that's the same for a lot of people, to be fair, whether they say it or not, whether they admit it to themselves. But I suppose that was where my journey of sort of self-improvement potentially started. I'd started working as a firefighter around that time. So I was probably 22, I guess. And that was a big career change for me, moving from the fitness industry, working as a fitness instructor and a personal trainer, into the fire service, where I was then suddenly around men who'd been doing this for 20 years of their life, and I was 22. So pretty much since I was born, they've been doing this job. So it's quite an interesting scenario to come into. And I was working my shift patterns. I was playing football on the weekends, on Saturdays. After the football, you tend to have a drink and go into Saturday night, feel bad on the Sunday, that sort of repetitive cycle. And after a time, I, I resented it a bit. Not in a, I loved football. I loved playing football. I loved the people I played with. I loved the club. And I did like the social aspect of it. But that repetitive nature of drinking and then sort of waking up feeling bad about it was something that I didn't like as much. I probably stopped drinking around that time. Prior to that, I'd started to read some more books. So some of the first books that I remember reading that sort of had a big impact of how I thought about things, how I thought about new things coming into my life. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That was a big book that impacted on my life. If you haven't read it, just read it. It's maybe 200 pages long. It's very easy to read. It's quite in depth about what went on within the concentration camps. So Viktor Frankl was in concentration camps during the Second World War for 3 years in total, I believe. And it's the first half of the book is about his time in those camps, and the second half is about his work outside of that, following it. But yeah, have a read of it if you haven't. One of my favourite quotes does come from that book, and that quote is this: "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way." I love that because I think it's such a fascinating thing that someone who's in that concentration camp, in that scenario, who doesn't know whether they're going to be alive tomorrow, can come up with something so simple but so effective, and even believe that in that moment, no one can take away his choice, his option to choose the way he thinks about his scenario, the way he chooses to act during his day-to-day life. And I think if he can do that in that moment, in those times, then we can do it when we're going through these easy lives in comparison. The other book I read near the start as well was another one. It was by Ryan Holiday, and that was The Obstacle is the Way. That delves into stoicism and the way of thinking of things that are outside of your control. So stoicism is a philosophical way of thinking where you look at things and determine if they're in your control or not. And if they are in your control, you look at what you can do to change the outcome if it's not a outcome that you enjoy. So it's quite a practical way of thinking about things. And that was another book that really changed the way I thought. Sort of going back into the sport, I suppose, was when I read David Goggins' book, Can't Hurt Me. I remember reading that and it detailing his journey from being massively overweight to sort of one of the hardest men on earth, essentially, just incredible. I remember the moment I finished that book, I was sat on the fire station on a night shift. I closed the book, I opened my phone, I signed up to the Brighton Marathon within 5 minutes of finishing that book. I think it just inspired me to like push myself and try something new. And at the time I was running 5Ks probably at a good speed, but I never thought about running any further. It didn't really interest me. But something about that book made me do it. And yeah, I'm thankful for it now. So that's sort of where sport came back into my life, to test myself. I use it to test myself now. Again, like I said, that was probably a similar time that I stopped drinking alcohol. I didn't like the fact that I relied on it to be social, and I sort of saw it as a mini challenge to myself, I suppose, to learn and develop my social skills in this time and to see what it was like to go about my day-to-day life without having that feeling in the back of my mind of you need to have drink to be fun, you need to be drinking to have a good time, etc., etc. So yeah, I had 2 years sober in total, and it was amazing. It was a really, really insightful time for me. And I think if you haven't done it, if you've ever thought about it and you're not 100% sure on it, just try it. Even if it's not for a long time, just see what it's like. See what going out and not drinking is like, especially in typical drinking situations. So you're clubbing. I mean, that's the hardest one probably, but just going to a pub, sitting there and having a chat with a non-alcoholic beer or something. But yeah, I did that. I did go clubbing a few times sober, which was eye-opening. I couldn't do it all the time, but every now and then it was okay. You sort of realize it's the people you're with that make the time, not the drink. Football tour, I did sober as well, which obviously I got slated for, but it was a great test for me as well, and I had a good time. And yeah, during that sobriety, it's a really interesting one because everyone at first looks at you like you've got an issue. So, what do you mean you're not drinking? Like, just have one then, just have one. Like, why won't you have one? Don't be boring, don't be boring. These are the things that people will say. But come the end of the night, when everyone's had a few, they come up to you and people would say, wow, I really respect what you're doing. I wish I had that strength to do that. Yeah, it's interesting to see how that changes as people get to that stage, whether that's the regret themselves reflecting back out and wishing they could do that. But yeah, so I was reading a lot more. I ran my marathon, which was a really good test. So I wanted to keep going with that sport and as a way of testing myself. So yeah, I was about 2 years sober, and then I went back to drinking. And until this day, I drink a lot more infrequently. I do go out sober a lot of the time. I tend to only drink on certain occasions. Even when I do drink, it's in a very different way to before my period of sobriety. I'm a lot more aware of the level of drunk I'm at, I suppose. But yeah, so I kept signing up to things. So I signed up to triathlons. I started with a sprint triathlon just to get a hang of it, to learn the transitions and stuff. And that was, yeah, a really good, really fun race, really fun distance actually, because you can just give it 100% for the distance and you're in pain by the end, but it's great fun. I then thought the next natural stage was to do a half Ironman, so I signed up for that, and I did that as well. That was last year, so 2023. Unfortunately, the swim was cancelled on the morning due to thunder and lightning, which made the bike and the run really fun. But it was a shame that I didn't get to do the full thing, and I still get jokes made at my expense that I haven't actually done a half Ironman and that I've only done a third Ironman. So yeah, that's something that I will have to go back to potentially. Although at some point I will be doing a full Ironman, so we will look out for that. This year, my goal was to do the Rock Trilogy. So for that, that's triathlons, 3 triathlons. Again, it's around half Ironman distances. However, it's split up. So a traditional triathlon would be swim, cycle, run. These ones is a swim into a cycle. You then run up and down one of the 3 peak mountains. So there's the trilogy is one of each of the 3 peaks. And then you cycle back to where you started. So the cycle's split into 2 and there's a mountain halfway through it. So it's a lot harder, that second cycle after the mountain. So yeah, in May I did Snowdon, and then we've got Scaffold Pike and Ben Nevis in September and October. So excited and nervous for those equally. So we'll see how those go. I also started BJJ, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, a year or two ago. And whilst I haven't been as consistent with it as I'd wanted to because of these triathlons, it's a phenomenal sport for both physical and mental strength and resilience building. Yeah, when someone's trying to choke you out or break your arm or whatever it is, and you've got to stay calm, relaxed, focus on your breathing to not exhaust yourself, but also have the strength to get out of that situation and the mental strength to work out how to get out of that situation is something that, yeah, I just really, really enjoyed. So I'm looking forward to getting back into that come the end of this year. But yeah, that's a sort of like overview, I suppose, on how I use sport to test myself. I set goals. I set. I like to sign up for events. I like to have things in the diary for me to aim towards. One other thing I did at this time as well was to come off social media. So I'd never been massive on social media, but I was on it enough that I realized I was just sitting there scrolling, as we all do. Every aspect, you get to a bus stop, what are you going to do? Scroll your phone. What are you going to do when you're in the line at the coffee shop? You scroll your phone. Everyone does it all the time. It's our go-to. Even without knowing it, we pull our phone out of our pocket and we start scrolling. We start looking for something just to keep our mind off waiting 2 minutes in a coffee shop line. It's mind-blowing. But anyway, so I came off that and that was awesome. That was probably like 4 years ago. Deleted my accounts, took everything off my phone, and the amount of sort of time I got back just in my day-to-day life was great. The amount of worrying went down, the amount of comparison. So again, that's something that we talk about a lot in terms of social media, is just seeing other people, highlights of their life essentially. They're not going to post the worst days of their life, or the majority of them won't. They want you to see the best parts of their life. And if those best parts of their life are better than yours, or that's a subjective term, I suppose, you'd start comparing. Even if you don't intend to, you find a way to compare their life to your life. But you're only getting that snippet of their life, so it's not a fair trade. That's another thing that I would recommend, both sobriety and coming off social media. Again, even if it's just for a short time, you don't have to delete your accounts. That's like the end game. That took me a year to do, to be fair. I deactivated them first, or I just removed the app from my phone. You could even still have it accessible on a laptop. That's up to you. But yeah, definitely give it a go. Let us know if you do, and let us know what you think, because I loved it. I suppose that brings me on to, how did I get to this point where I'm sat in a room alone and talking to a microphone and a camera? I started listening to podcasts during this time as well, and I suppose they were a supplement to the books I was reading when I was in the gym, when I was driving in the car. You can't hold a book. So for me, listening to those like long form content, conversations, learning from people just fascinated me. And I came across Modern Wisdom by Chris Williamson. You can probably tell by the name of my podcast that I'm a big fan of that. That was one of the biggest podcasts that I followed. I listened to most of the episodes. I still do. And yeah, it was really eye-opening to me how interesting people were, how much knowledge people had. And I just really enjoyed it. So I started to have more conversations like these in my own life. I started speaking to people. I'd choose a topic, I'd bring it up with them. We'd have a conversation about it, the in-depth, interesting conversations. And I realized that I really enjoyed it. And I thought about maybe starting a podcast. And I thought, if I do, it gives me an excuse to have more of these conversations. And by having that schedule, like a weekly schedule, it's just a way of holding myself accountable for uploading them, for making sure that I am having those conversations that I know I enjoy. and learning as much as I can from other people as well. So it took me a few months of telling people about it. I was probably secretly trying to gauge people's reactions. The reactions seemed genuinely positive, so I sort of kept thinking about it. I was thought about a name for months, came up with the name, got some artwork sorted. And yeah, after a time of just thinking about every little detail of what I was going to do, I just decided to do it. So again, that's like just doing the thing is something that Chris Williamson talks about. And it's so true. There's nothing other than just doing the thing. If you're not doing the thing, then you're not doing anything. You can talk about it for months, years, and there's loads of people that do. They talk about what they're doing, what their plans are for life, but you see them never actually progress and never actually do anything. So without trying, you never know. So give it a go and do the thing. So yeah, that's where I am now, I suppose. It's been a brief little run through of my life, I suppose. But yeah, I think sports, sobriety, reading, social media, these were things that pinpoints of my journey. And there's loads of other stuff that would have happened along the way. But I think those are the most important points that I've learned from. So yeah, I'm really enjoying this journey and the podcast and meeting some really, really awesome people along the way. And I've got loads of interesting people booked in, so I'm looking forward to that coming up. But yeah, I just wanted to leave you with an excerpt. So this was a article that I read a couple of months ago now, and again, this sort of reflects back on the social media side of things for me and how I felt coming off it, what I sort of realized about myself. And whilst it has its pros, social media, it definitely has quite a lot of cons as well. And I'm sure as the years go on, this will be something that will be looked into. But yeah, this article has sort of stuck with me. So I'm going to read the opening of it. It's written by Freya India. She has a Substack called Girls. And this article is called What's Become of Us. Most of the time, when we talk about social media being bad for us, we mean for our mental health. These platforms make us anxious, depressed, and insecure, and for many reasons. The constant social comparison, the superficiality and inauthenticity of it all, being ranked and rated by strangers, all this seems to make us miserable. But I don't just think it makes us miserable. I've written before about how it makes us bitchy and self-absorbed, and over time I'm becoming convinced that our most pressing concern isn't that social media makes us feel worse about ourselves, it's that social media makes us worse people. Social comparison, for example, this is one of the main problems people mention when talking about the harms of social media. Constantly comparing our beauty, our success, our lifestyle, our popularity to infinite streams of other people makes us feel anxious and inadequate, yes. But I also think it makes us resentful, bitter, competitive, quietly wishing for others to fail. We talk constantly about what like, follow, and comment metrics do to our self-esteem. But don't they also make us so shallow? We hate when people judge us by numbers on a screen, but aren't we doing it all the time to everyone else, even subconsciously? We talk endlessly about how editing apps and filters give girls and young women anxiety and body dysmorphia, which is important, but never about how they make us competitive, envious, vain. Sometimes it's not my self-esteem I'm worried about. It's who I become when I obsess over my profile and image and what everyone else is doing. Sometimes I lock my screen and don't like who is looking back at me in its black reflection. That article goes on into more depth about everything else surrounding that, but that opening, when I read it the first time, just like completely blew my mind, and it made me think of it in such a different way. We always talk about the mental health aspect of things, but actually, yeah, thinking about the way it changes us as a person without us even knowing it, and the way we want to act versus the way we are acting. So I just wanted to give you that excerpt as it sort of relates to what I was talking about, but also to give you something to take away and just to think about going forward. Next time you're on social media, think about what thoughts are actually going through your mind whilst you're scrolling, whilst you're watching these videos. And that brings us to a close today. So I'm going to stop it there. And I just want to say again, thank you for listening. Thank you for the support so far. And hopefully you'll stick around for the future episodes to come. If you do want to keep up to date with what's happening on social media, that is on Instagram, and it is at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening.